Hello, good morning. I'm happy to open this session on skills for resilient researchers. And I have with me this morning 4 highly knowledgeable panelists to talk about what we call skills for resilient researchers. I'm Claire Morel. I'm the head of the unit in charge of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions in the European Commission in DG Education, Culture, Youth and Sport. And I'm replacing our Deputy Director General, who unfortunately cannot be with us this morning and was supposed to moderate this session. So as I said, we have this morning 4 panelists to talk about the need to develop skills for resilient researchers. And I'll start by introducing them. Then we will have a set of questions, answers, and in order to make this session as interactive as possible, we propose to organize 2 sets of questions, and after each round of questions, the floor will be open to the audience, to the people who are following this session. They'll have the possibility to interact with the members of the panel through the Q&A section, the question and answer question. So, as I said, first of all, welcome to this workshop on skills for resilient researchers. And I believe that it's really the right time to speak about this topic. First of all, because the COVID crisis has deeply reshaped our societies, and it's very clear that research and innovation will continue to be critical levers to ensure sustainable and inclusive recovery from this crisis. And we need to boost the resilience, the competitiveness, and the transformation of our societies. But as I said, before maybe we talk about resilient researchers, we should start by explaining what we mean by resilient researchers. And it will be very interesting to see if within this panel and with the audience following this session, we have the same understanding of what a resilient researcher should be. So in my view, or in our view, it's a researcher who can easily adapt to unexpected situation and crisis, who has developed skills allowing him or her to grab new career opportunities, including in a very uncertain environment. Such researchers should have the right combination of skills to innovate, to be able to detect, to tackle upcoming challenges, and also to communicate scientific evidence to policymakers and to the public at large, and work across sectors and disciplines. So training highly skilled and adaptable researchers are therefore essential. And this is what we will discuss in this session, in particular through 2 initiatives, 2 programs of the European Commission, which bring education, research, and skills development together. And those 2 initiatives, those 2 programs are the MSCA, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action, and the EIT, the European Institute for Technology. So your feedback is important because, as you know, we will be launching next year the new version of these programs. And we need to know from the panelists and from the audience how we can maybe do better to train students, to train researchers in this very unstable political and societal environment. Through the MSCA, through the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action, we aim to ensure that researchers are able to work across sectors, notably across academia and industry, across disciplines. We need to ensure that they can establish strong international partnerships, and as I mentioned already, to communicate the evidence from their research to policy makers and to the public at large. This is why within the frame of the MSCA, we put a particular focus on intersectoral and transversal skills, which are a core element of the program. For example, through our doctoral programs, the innovative training networks, we have about 1/3 of all our partners come from the industry. the intention under Horizon Europe is to further strengthen the links with the industry and the SMEs and enhance the entrepreneurial aspects of the MSCA program. In addition to the MSCA, we also have the EIT, the European Institute of Technology, which is another way through which the Commission promotes skills developments which are relevant to the labor market. There are currently 200 higher education institutions which are partner to the EIT Knowledge and Innovation Communities, the KICs, which are offering training mainly at master and doctoral level and aim at equipping young innovators with the entrepreneurial skills and the mindset that will allow them to turn their idea into reality. So without further ado, let's discuss with our panel today how the MSCA and the EIT can prepare our researchers, our innovators for the uncertainties of a quickly changing environment of the 21st centuries and how these programs can help our researchers become more resilient. So, as I mentioned, we have three highly knowledgeable panelists with us today. We have Andrea Ferrari, who is the director of the Cambridge Graphene Center and is in charge as well of the Center for Doctoral Training in Graphene Technology. He used to be an MSCA fellow, an ERC grantee, and when the ERC was launched, and he also won an ERC Synergy grant. We also have Rob Smets, who is the director of the public-private partnership at Philips Chief Technology Office, and is in his current role. Rob is in charge of managing Philips' participation in over 20 running European training networks and European industrial doctorates under the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action. We have also with us Fernanda Bayanka, who is the vice chair of the executive committee of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and Frank Gielen, who is the education director of the EIT Energy. So I'll start with the first questions to the panelists. As I mentioned, the COVID crisis has prompted public-private organizations to adapt their working practices, to adopt new ways of communicating, to accelerate digitalization. What have been, according to you, the immediate impact on skills and knowledge areas in your fields, and which additional skills and practices should be mainstream to make scientists more resilient and face the current transition under the exceptional situation such as the COVID crisis? So maybe we'll start with you, Fernanda, who can present maybe a view from the researchers and the alumni community. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. And I would like to thank the opportunity to participate in this panel, in this discussion on behalf of the MCAA. I'm happy to represent the MCAA members and former and present MSCA fellows that may make part of this community. Yes, indeed, the current situation had a huge impact on on putting our resilience at stake. It had a huge impact on skills. We had to develop digital skills and I would say to a certain point green skills also. Most of us didn't have access to our workplaces, to our labs, and so we were forced to work at a distance. And this had a positive impact. It accelerated what should be already on place in many institutes. It allowed us to work from home, which has some positive aspects, at least for those that don't have kids that don't have to homeschool. But certainly, it put in evidence our digital skills. It also had an effect on broaden our knowledge, because it pushed the institutes to organize talks online. And for many months, we have been doing meetings online, most of us. And that allowed to actually meet people online that we wouldn't meet otherwise, to attend talks that we wouldn't do otherwise. So in a way, it made it more inclusive, and it forced us to search for also training outside our own specialization. And I think all these are positive effects, but all this was in a period of much stress for many of us, and this situation added to the distress that already exists, especially among the young researchers. And I would like to draw your attention to a recent survey published by Nature, 10th September, I think, that really analyzes how the young researchers have been impacted in dealing with all this added distress. So this can be a good motto for the discussion that we are having here today.
Okay, thank you very much, Fernanda. Indeed, as you said, researchers, as many other parts, I guess, of our population, had to adapt very quickly and very swiftly. And I think you've seen a lot of positive aspects to it, not only, but a lot of positive aspects. Now I give the floor to Andrea Ferrari, who can give us a view from not only from the academia, but also as a scientist in charge of training young researchers.
Thank you very much. Yes, clearly, especially at the beginning, we closed on the 22nd of March, and our labs reopened on the 22nd or 20th of June. So it was quite a long closure, complete closure. It was kind of a shock also because we received only 3 days notice, but I know other people were told in the morning for the afternoon. So we consider ourselves fortunate that we had 3 days, 3 full days to organize all our things, extract all the things we needed to extract from the building before shutting it down. The university was never closed before, not even during the war. So it's something that never happened before. So clearly all the procedures had to be made on the fly. There wasn't a plan in place. And but then after the initial shock, I have to say, after the initial few weeks, and especially after the schools and nurseries have reopened, I think we now see some positive from the situation. Having shifted a lot of the meetings online, well, all of the meetings online, and cancelled unnecessary meetings, I think the balance between meeting and actual research is much better. All the meetings start in time, end in time. People can attend from within the labs or from home or from wherever they are. So I think this is quite good. And I think I've seen that these online tools, now we are all used to them, they can work very well. In terms of the research itself, clearly we had to, for example, for the first year students, they have to pass exams and also do reports. They had to change the work towards a review style work rather than original research in the lab. But this has also been useful because has given them more time to prepare for the start of the PhD that should be in October. So during the first year, they do a master degree and then they start with a PhD in October. Clearly, this will not be good if it continues for a long time without lab access. But luckily, from June, we were able to put in the procedures first for a limited and then for a more extended lab access. And we are now hoping to get it to as extended as possible. And also in terms of lab access, things have changed. Most people were familiar with universities. If you go in the lab at any given time of the day, they seem almost empty. So you wonder where people are anywhere without COVID in normal situation. Now that all the access is controlled and people have to book certain hours, I will say the attendance to the lab has significantly increased, and people are much more focused on the work they do during this time. And finally, we try to see how we can help in this situation. So we started lines of research to develop materials that can be useful for COVID, for PPEs or masks, together with partners in Europe. We have created a working group on COVID within the Graphene Flagship, and we submitted a few European proposals on these areas, and they are still being evaluated at this stage. Finally, people had more time to write up research results they had before. But clearly, I believe, I can bet there will be a peak of publications during this lockdown period with respect to a dip, as people may have expected, because people had more time to go through the data. But this will not continue in the long term. I think the challenge now is to, especially in the labs, to find a way of using them in a safe way, but as much as possible, because most of the labs are inherently safe. If you think about a clean room with 400 air changes per hour, clearly this is a safe environment to work, even in the peak of the pandemic, provided you have certain rules in place. So we need to make the most of the situation and allow access to the facilities to everybody.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I see as well that you have found some, let's say, positive solution, positive aspects to this, to the current crisis to which researchers have been confronted. So indeed, we can probably expect a lot of publications, an avalanche maybe of publications in the coming, in the near future. Now I'd like to give the floor to Rob Smith, who can give us his view from the industry, and as someone very much engaged in building bridges between academia and industry.
Yes, thank you. Checking if you can hear me. Yes, okay, good. Yes, it's been crazy times also for industry, and then even more importantly for a company like Philips, who's active in the health environment. So our customers are hospitals, care homes, etc., for medical imaging equipment, for patient monitoring, for ventilators. So it's been a mixture in these crazy days. On the one hand, there was a tremendous increase for ventilators, as you may know, and for patient monitoring. On the other hand, there was a decline in other types of equipment. So I think in general, that goes for companies that have been needed to be resilient to change. Some things have to be sped up, others were a bit slow. But also, I'd like to focus this on the healthcare area. In hospitals, the same dual approach was there. There were the ICUs that were really overflooded with patients, and everything had to be done on a day-to-day basis. Whereas other areas of expertise, the patients didn't come into the hospitals because all hands on deck for COVID patients. So it's been crazy times. I think what's important there is digitization is the way towards the future, and digitization of healthcare takes a lot of time. I think that's our experience. So as a company, we provide many solutions, communication solutions, platforms and tools to connect parts of hospitals and hospitals amongst each other. And that's always been hard to adopt. And I think one of the tendencies that you can see now is that there's a real trend towards remote monitoring, and that also, like everybody else in science, they're adopting these mobile ways of working and remote communication. Also in healthcare, this is being done. So the consult of your doctor with the patient, now there's a breakthrough of going digital and of doing things that we were not used to. We now cannot all come to the hospital. So these technologies are being embraced, and with it, the privacy and security issues are being sped up to solve them and make sure that people have trust and want to use these technologies. However, it's still early days, and I think that's where there's a role for young researchers, whether they're medical researchers, doctors, young doctors, or researchers elsewhere, is to to speed up that digitization, to give the best examples of what you can do with remote technologies. Let's say the generation that is born digital or nearly born digital now, the young doctors can help the older ones in adopting these technologies and making the change. And I think in terms of resilience, and we'll come to talk to it later, I think digitalization is one of the crucial elements that will help the young generation being resilient. And there's a mission for the younger generation to take that on board in many sectors, but for the healthcare sector, for sure.
Thank you very much, Rob. I mean, will this have an impact somehow, this extremely quick way towards digitalization? Will it have an impact on your engagement in the doctoral programs in which you're involved, in the way you will engage with academia, in the way you will train the future researchers?
Yes and no, because digitalization has always been an important part of any of the programs we're doing in the Marie Curie Fellowship. We do quite some industry doctorates, and I think out of the 20 that are running, 18 really deal with digitalization, whether it's on the imaging part or whether it's on the communication part of patient data, working on privacy and security. It has always been an important element that our PhDs bring in such a consortium. But I'm pretty sure that for many more areas and for many more parties, the digitalization will be important to bring in any area that the young researchers are working on.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, for these additional remarks. I'd like now to give the floor to Frank Gehlen, who is as I mentioned, the vice chair of the with the education director of the EIT InnoEnergy, who can give us the views from maybe a more innovation perspective at the crossroad between education, innovation, and research. Frank?
Yes, thank you, Claire. So first, I want to say that within the whole skill set that is expected from researchers, that InnoEnergy is mainly focusing on the innovation management and entrepreneurial skills on top of the scientific and the research skills that are typically developed in the universities. And it's important to know that we implement this in two ways. So first of all, we have a number of programs that develop basic skills like learning about business and learning about economics. But we also connect our students to an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem, through mobility programs, which are done either in our startups or which are done in industry. And you can imagine that this international mobility has been hit very hard by the COVID crisis. But I'm happy to say that, things are working out quite well. And let me start maybe by saying on how we define those innovation and entrepreneurial skills, because very often when I talk about entrepreneurship skill development, people think about the typical startup in a garage in Silicon Valley, and that's a very, very narrow image. And that's why in InnoEnergy we make it very clear, and we state that the entrepreneurship skill development is really learning you the ability to apply your skills and competencies under conditions of big uncertainty. And conditions of uncertainty are typical in innovation, in starting up a business, and also now in COVID. So I think that this remains the core of our learning objectives and what we want to prevent to the students. Now, in terms of how do we deal with this mobility and moving online, a lot of the PhD students had contacted us and almost panicking and said, well, we'll not be able to graduate on the AIT label because we cannot do the mobility, we have to work online. And we were thinking, yes, maybe the companies and the research centers are not willing to take you in anymore as a mobility student. But the reverse was true. And I think certainly Rob can relate to that, is that, well, of course, there is an impact on the doctoral programs, but the whole world is experiencing the same problem. And if we went to the companies and asked them, do you still want to do this mobility? They said, yes, of course, we still want to work with your students, but we'll do it remotely because the new skill of tomorrow is being able to work remotely. And what does that mean? Well, working together with colleagues in a different time zone, always online, but also not only working with them, but making decisions in such an environment and collaborating. And so this kind of was a very positive element to us, that we see that really those skills are now becoming very important. The ability to be very flexible, adapt to this online way of working. And the interesting part is, if you go back and look at which people have the best skills in remote learning, in remote decision making, in remote collaboration, then we come to the gamers. And that may be a surprise to many people, because very often we don't like youngsters playing too much online. But it has been proven on a scientific basis that gaming skills are really the ones that we need also for this remote collaboration. So one of the things we're doing in InnoEnergy is introducing those serious gaming, with the focus on serious, to develop those entrepreneurial and innovation skills, so that while learning this, the skills for innovation, you also learn the additional skills in an online environment, which is competitive through to the gaming nature, and which brings this in an important part. So that's certainly one new thing which we accelerated, because we had planned this for 2021 and beyond. Due to COVID, we start this year, so already in September, we launch this serious gaming to develop innovation and entrepreneurial skills. And the second thing which we accelerated, which is also a good part, is that, like Andrea was saying, the labs are empty, and it's difficult to get access to them. Well, a lot of our partners ask, well, can we work together to see how we can push the limits of technology to have remote lab operations, whether by virtual reality, robotics, and so on. And that also brings kind of a new set of skills on the table, because if you operate a lab remotely, you have to rethink everything from security, scheduling, access. And that has been quite, I would say, an eye-opening exercise, which even if we will not need it anymore, hoping that COVID would be gone, the overall quality of managing labs will improve, and the efficiency. So that's kind of where we stand today.
Thank you very much, Frank. I mean, we also have these debates on the mobility issue, because the MSc is a program that promotes very much the mobility of researchers. So we need to find maybe a new balance between physical and virtual mobility, although we believe that virtual mobility will never be able to really replace physical mobility. Your idea of serious gaming is an interesting one, I think, which we will follow. And as a matter of fact, today, during the 3 days of the European Research and Innovation Days, we have Science is Wonderful, which is organized as a sort of big game. And with avatars, I don't know, maybe you should go and have a look. And yes, I have to say that I've had difficulties entering and doing it, and I've had to ask my son to help me into this new virtual identity, virtual reality, which I'm not extremely familiar with. So I mean, your experiment with serious game is a very interesting one. We've received 2 questions, and we will decide who want to answer them. The first one comes from Brian Cahill, and I don't know if you can read them. It says, this large number of publications will be written by people without carrying responsibilities for young children. Will the pandemic exacerbate gender inequalities? That's the first question. And the second one from Ludovic Tilly. Do you think that transversal skills have played or will play an important role in young researchers' capacity to respond so rapidly to the crisis? So who wants to answer any of these questions?
I think I can go on the publication, because I say that I think the statement is general statement that there are more publications will be correct, and I think I also agreed with the question that unfortunately, and I also explained in when I spoke, that between March, the end of March, and the 1st of June, when the schools opened here in the UK, it was a disaster. I don't know how many of you tried the online teaching, not with PhD students, which I think it can be made to work very well, with 5-year-old or 6-year-old students that are your daughters or sons. It really is extremely difficult, and it takes your time. You cannot simply place the children in front of the screen. We set everything up in our home with a nice white screen and so on, but still they don't stay there, and they need to do a lot of other activities at home during the day. So I am totally sure that in a situation of hard lockdown, where you can really do nothing, including sending children to school, the situation is that everybody who has young children, especially, is in a very difficult situation and there is no way out. However, the way out for me is science that clearly says that, as far as I can understand, young children are the least affected by coronavirus, both in terms of difficult outcomes and being infected themselves. So we need to find a way to make schools work during this period of time, even in a situation where we have lockdowns. So that is not something for me to answer. It's something at the government level. Otherwise, we cannot get out. Once we have the schools open, I actually believe everybody can benefit from this remote working, because we had people attending meetings that before were not able to attend because of childcare responsibilities. They had to leave work maybe in the afternoon, maybe in the morning, maybe in certain times of the day. We had meetings with children present. I think it's the new normal to have a kid jumping in front of the camera doing a Zoom meeting. Nobody gets upset about this. Why would you? And so I think it is possible to make it work. And for some people, this has been an improvement. And finally, my hope is really to if we need to have limited access to the labs and to the workplace, if we can extend the hours throughout most people think is, if you want to work in the evening or on Saturday or early in the morning, that's against family responsibilities. But maybe some people, they prefer to devote their core time to the children and then later on spend more time in the lab and working on publications. So I think there are some positives that can be taken from this. But one point, the schools being open, having the possibility to have help with childcare, this is something for governments to answer. And without that, clearly, is very difficult.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So you are a bit of a different opinion that maybe in the end, this crisis will facilitate in a way the balance between family and professional obligations.
Yes, and it has been for me. I never spent so much time with my family as in my entire career. Typically fly 2 or 3 times a week. And I think I took 3 flights since March. So for me, it's been completely different. But as I said, the assumption has to be that the childcare, the schools have to be open. Otherwise, the balance is not there.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know if the panelists want to answer this question or the other one on the role that transversal skills have played in the capacity of researchers to respond so quickly to the crisis. Yes, Fernanda, and we have another one, I think that would be for Frank. Yes, Fernanda.
Just briefly to add to the first question by Brian, well, it's true that in the current pandemics, in the first phase where we had lockdowns, it affected gender-wise, the women had a lot less possibilities to work at home. Of course, things are changing and we have more and more men participating in the education and care of children, but still there is a weight on many women. And there are many studies that show that. There's data from journals showing that there was a huge decrease on papers signed by women. And we are collaborating also with Eurodoc and Young Academy of Europe on surveys that they are launching. We are launching a survey also, and altogether we are seeing that there is an impact on women researchers. They feel more pressed, they have less time, they can't have time to publish. So even everything that can be done from home, providing that you can do it, affects more the women at this point. I agree that in the future, taking a different impact with schools open, there are advantages of being able to do partially work from home, but having complete lockdown and not being able to go to the labs when you need to work on the lab is not a solution. You can have some data to write some papers, but you can't do that forever. You need to go back to the lab at some point.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. I think that's clear. And I think the impact of the crisis on women in general, not only researchers. Of course, for researchers, it's been particularly difficult, as we understood, especially the access to lab, etc. But maybe more generally, it has been particularly heavy, I think, for women. There is a question on what you mean by serious gaming. Maybe, Franck, just in a few sentences.
Well, serious gaming is using the concept of gaming, like a competitive aspect, collaboration, but in a setting where the learning goals are embedded, where we say we clearly have this link to other learning activities that you need to fulfill. So we are not playing Pokemon or some other game, but what we have done is we have created a competition between our students, PhD students and master school students, and MBA students, where they really see the serious process on what investment is really in life today, and they play the game as they were real investors and real startups. So it's connected with reality, and it's connected with real learning objectives that they have to kind of master in order to build up those skills.
Okay, thank you. We have let's say, a question. I'm not sure we can take all the questions. They are all very interesting and relevant. Maybe I'll take this one before we go to the second round of questions. From Geraldine Kani. With respect to virtually monitoring training progress, can the speakers recommend any methods? How to find the best balance between trust, security, and governance? It's a very rich and dense question, but would one of you like to answer in a few words? Virtually monitoring training progress.
Well, I can give some answer on that. So one of the areas in which the EIT KICs have heavily invested is using learning analytics, so the data science of learning, so that it's connected to learning activities which happen in a virtual environment. And this can be simple lectures, but this can also be completion of assignments, project work, and even informal learning. So that's part of the solution, is using learning analytics, which I think is a new science being applied to education. It's still in its early days, but it gives us the same potential to really monitor what's going on as you have in other sectors like retailing and marketing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frank. We still have some questions, but we might be able to answer them in the second round of questions that I'm going to ask you now. First of all, we talked a lot about resilience. Can resilience be taught? Can there be specific training programs for researchers to allow them to be more resilient? Which new knowledge areas have emerged and that will require critical investments in the coming years to ensure that our researchers, our societies are better prepared to tackle the global challenges? And how can the EU better support these new competencies, these new knowledge areas through its programs like the EIT, like the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action, within the framework of the new European education area and the new European research area? So those are dense questions, I realize, but maybe we can, I don't know, start with you, Rob.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Claire. And let me add the question of the transversal skills, which was not answered before, and give a quick answer to that as well. Because I think, yes, it's really important knowing that the majority of young researchers will not end up pursuing a research career until their 40th or 50th. Many of them, as we know, will end up elsewhere in industry, in government organization, at least in a non-research environment. Those skills are important to develop, to be focused on your research topic, but also to be wide enough to know other things, to learn other skills. So that has always been important and will stay important, I think. And I think that's one of the topics that can add to resilience. Resilience means being adaptive to changing situations. We're now talking about COVID, staying at home, working remotely. That's one big change, but there might be very other different changes where you still go to work but have different challenges. So I think resilience is just a skill in general. And what can be done in the education is to make sure that young researchers get used to being flexible, to being resilient. And let's take the example of the Marie Curie scheme. That's why we like it so much. You get a type of young researchers that are attracted by traveling abroad. Okay, we know the situation now, but the mobility is one of the features that researchers like or don't like. And if you don't like it, you don't apply for a Marie Curie fellowship. But I think those are the type of researchers that are particularly interesting for industry, but I also think they are particularly resilient to change. Before this panel session, I had an interview with two of our Marie Curie researchers, just checking what their feeling was. And I know I've talked to them before, and they said, well, we have to do so many things. We have to travel, we have to go to this training. We're talking to all these different other Marie Curie fellows with different backgrounds, so I can hardly get to my work. And then we said, yeah, that's basically one of the things we want to learn, to teach you. You have 4 years time, you have a 3-year fellowship to combine focusing on your research work with all the things that are surrounding you and that you have to be flexible to. And I think now talking to the same researchers, they say, well, we've got this flexibility. We were used to being dragged around Europe, as they say. It's a form of resilience that is being taught in these Marie Curie schemes. And I think that's one of the key elements that I would like to emphasize in this session. Yes, look wider, be broader than just the research work you're doing on. You have to make sure you're good at your research work, but this widening to the world, I think that's an important feature of being resilient, because you're easier to adapt to changes that you didn't foresee when you started your work.
Thank you very much, Rob. So it seems that we already, yes, Fernanda, it seems that we are already doing a lot in terms of preparing researchers to be more adaptable, to be more resilient. But I'm sure that Fernanda will have ideas on how this can be maybe further strengthened and improved.
Yeah, about resilience, I think it definitely can be taught. Well, at least the American Psychology Association says so. So we have to believe. Maybe we should have a psychologist in this panel. That would help. I think that the MSCA can have a huge role on this aspect, as the only program actually in Horizon Europe that is specifically focused on training and career development of researchers and at all career stages. And even if I think that most of us researchers, we are quite resilient and persistent, because this is such a hard career to follow, but we can do better and we can prepare the young generations. So actually asking around the MCAA, my colleagues, what they would think, most of my colleagues were insisting on the need to train the young researchers on being resilient, but also supporting them, and some programs on mental health support, especially on times of stress. And well, I would say that stress we have throughout our researcher's career anyway, that would be helpful. But at the same time, training on communication and management to more senior researchers, because you also need to have the support of your older peers, and especially of your mentors, your supervisors. That is also very important, and that is a role that the MSCA can do quite well. Just to add, the MCAA and Eurodoc released last year a declaration on sustainable research careers that points out 4 points that we feel are really needed to be improved to develop this concept of sustainable researcher career. And if these points would be met, the stress on researchers could diminish. And if you diminish the overall stress, you have more resilience left for the stress that happens punctually.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, for stressing these aspects of stress and the links between resilience and stress. I'm not completely sure, but maybe this is a discussion we can have. We can continue after this this panel, how this can be addressed through programs like the EIT or the MSCA. I don't know if Andrea or Frank wants to answer the second round of questions. Otherwise, we also have questions in our Q&A. Andrea, do you want
I can say something quick on resilience. Within our doctoral training program, we always taught transversal skills in entrepreneurship, patenting, team building exercises, and all these sort of things. And it's not just we, it's all the over almost 200 centers that have been created in the UK in the past years. So they all need to have wider knowledge than the specific field. I also have to say that most of our researchers work within the European Graphene Flagship. At the moment, this is 163 institutions between companies, research centers, and universities in Europe. And they've always been used to meetings and moving and also doing meetings online. So I think the COVID sort of brought all these skills together, a bit like what Rob was saying, that sometimes people didn't see the benefit, but then during this time, the benefit was seen. I also want to address the point that was made before in terms of remote lab management and so on. We have learned on the fly, not theoretically, we had to do. So I have now every day half an hour remote meeting on the lab management that we do online, and we check everything online. This does not exist before. And I believe that this kind of things, I have to say it again, improve the possibility for research also for women. Because before COVID, you were in the building, you opened the door, and there was somebody else using the instrument, because there was no proper online booking, no monitoring of whoever was in and out, and so on and so forth. Now, this is very well oiled, and nobody who has special needs in terms of time of the day or whatever does not find this as fulfilled in the new management we have in place. So I really need to go back to what I said before. There's nothing we can do in terms of schools opening, but I can only see advantages in a situation where you can decide if you are at work, if you are at home, if you work by Zoom, in person, at midnight, at 2 in the morning, at 4 in the afternoon, in a way that you were never allowed to do before. And in fact, if anything, as I say, discarding the period April, May, and June where the schools were closed, after the schools were opening, in our experience, everybody has been doing better in this respect. Finally, we have also we're starting to learn on the fly to make use of virtual meetings where people have avatars, as you mentioned before. We organized the meeting for women in graphene, all done by avatar in a virtual class, in a virtual sort of meeting room where people could discuss between themselves and so on. It was not perfect. We're still learning on it. And we are also planning now in the next few months to make our program, which was a master in Cambridge, available for everybody. We are making all of it online. We are trying to put some artificial intelligence and some interactivity. We don't want to have simply recorded people on the screen to listen to. We want to have interactive exercises. Once this is done, we will put it for everybody. So people anywhere in the world that before had to come to Cambridge in person, and we only selected 10 of them, if everything goes well, we'll be able to access this material, you know, from their home, you know, maybe on the, you know, after they take, instead of watching a Netflix movie, they watch or they take a lecture online. So this is something we are not ready yet. Hopefully it will be ready in a few months, and I'm talking with the university to make sure that the material is then available for everybody to use.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for highlighting again that the crisis, or what the current crisis, also has quite strong positive, in fact, side effects, maybe contrary to what we keep on hearing. And it's interesting to see that the R&I world is taking up these opportunities, and that you are yourself offering now this online program. That's quite an interesting development. Frank, do you want to add something to everything that has been said on this second round of questions?
Yes, very shortly, but since this is a panel, I want to make it a bit more controversial in the sense that, I mean, the question, can resilience be taught? We also hear for entrepreneurship, can you teach entrepreneurship? And well, I don't think you can teach it, but students can learn it, which is for me a big difference. And when talking about resilience, which is really also something you need to have done and have experienced, I think the best learning school, unfortunately, is incidents like COVID, because then you have to do the right things. And but then comes, of course, the question, if you want to prepare people for this, what do you do? And one of the approaches we have taken from a pedagogical point of view in the EIT KICS is what we call out of the comfort zone learning, where we really try to create situations where the student or the PhD researcher gets into a context where he's not used to, maybe in terms of working in a multidisciplinary team or having to work together with psychologists, so things that are not standard. And I think there you learn how to become resilient. But as an academic or as a professor, I don't think you can teach it. And you can read a book about it, but it will not help you. You have to really be what I call in the trenches and make sure that sometimes you fail there, but the failing is the learning, and the next time you'll do better. And I think we have seen that in many cases, specifically related to COVID. If you look how Singapore reacted to the COVID crisis, part of the learning was done during the SARS crisis. And I think that's kind of a good analogy.
Thank you very much. We seem to be having divergent views, and that's completely normal. On the one hand, we hear that some psychologists think that resilience can be taught, and other education experts think that it cannot be learned or it cannot be taught. But probably, I think everybody will agree by offering training in the so-called transversal skills, we can only improve the skills of our researchers to become more resilient. Before we only have a few minutes before the end of our session today, and I'd like to raise a question from Ludovic Tilly, who is asking if researchers under short-term contract, can they be resilient? And do we need probably more support for better EU human capital? What do you think of those researchers who are under short-term contract? Can they be resilient?
Maybe I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but in terms of short-term, I have to say these things. In terms of our doctoral students who were finishing in September, we have offered a 6 months extension fully paid to all of them. In terms of all the postdocs with the contract ending between March and September, the university has also guaranteed an extension to all of them, including the ones that were actually ending the contract, not being terminated for any other reason. So we try to put in place these instruments to make sure that the downtime will not affect them. But I am now, and sorry to repeat myself, convinced that now we have put in, if we discard the 3 or 4 months of sort of messiness, learning on the fly, as I said many times, we have put in place an environment where people can be productive and continue the work. So I will consider what happens in the next 6 months, unless there, again, I repeat myself, unless we go back to a full 100% lockdown. So if things continue in the controlled environment we are, I think that there should be not a huge difference when it comes to new to short-term contract positions. We have opened many new jobs during the past few months. We are advertising many new postdoctoral and PhD positions. So we did what we could within this environment. And in terms of research areas, if somebody needs to decide what they want to work on, clearly it was discussed many times, there are many new areas of interest, but also areas that may be maybe not so obvious. For example, I read the Ericsson report in July. There's been an increase of internet usage between 20 and 100% with respect to the previous predictions, which is kind of obvious because we are using, and this puts a lot of challenges, including on energy consumption, how to transmit data at a much lower and using much lower energy than we do nowadays. Maybe people don't realize that this is one of the biggest contributors to global warming, not flights that don't happen anymore at the moment. So there are lots of new directions of research that can be taken during this time, also for people with short-term contracts.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'm glad that you all see some positive challenges in the current crisis that the researchers can grab, institutions, the European Commission as well, the EU. I mean, I think it's very promising. I must say that I was expecting more, let's say, maybe negative sides to the to this crisis in our discussion today. So I'm really let's say positively impressed by your presentation. We only have a few minutes left, so maybe just in 2 or 3 words, can each of you tell us what would you recommend the EU to do now, in really 2-3 words, in the framework of its MSCA and program and the EIT? What would you recommend?
Well, if I can start very briefly, I would recommend to increase the budget of the MSCA instead of decreasing it. That will be the most important at this point to support the future generation of researchers. Without that, there's no measures that can be taken. If there is an increase of 17% of demand and a decrease of over 25% of budget, there's no miracles one can do.
I completely agree with you, Fernanda. Just 1 or 2 words, Andrea, if you wish.
Well, I need to agree with Fernanda. The budget for research in general and for the European Research Council and many other initiatives needs to be increased. EU really needs to learn from COVID that is science that will save us, and so we need to fund science at the appropriate level. And then the only other word that I need to give to the EC is flexibility. This is the moment when we need to be flexible, the project officer, whoever runs the grants, whoever grants the schemes. At the moment, I'm not complaining. I have found with people I interact with this degree of flexibility, but often it's not clear if it's because we work with them closely or is a general approach.
I think it's a general approach. Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you as well for your words of encouragement. Rob and Frank, just 2 or 3 words because we will be cut in a few minutes.
Yeah, digitalization, support digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. And Frank, before we are cut.
Yeah. I think we all agree that transversal skills are key to this resilience. And what I would ask from the EU level and EIT is please also help us convince the university management, the department heads, the academic staff, because the PhD students are convinced, but not always their promoter or the other stakeholders at the university. And for me, this is a key part.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much for your time, for your encouragement, for your recommendations. We will listen again to what you've told us, and we will use it to shape the new generation of program, EIT, MSCA, and the other ones as well, dealing with research, innovation, and higher education. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and thank you for the active participation of the people who followed our our discussion today. Thank you, and goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye. Goodbye.